We are so delighted to have Uta and Chris Frith visiting us for the next 2 weeks. I think it is no exaggeration to say that Uta is one of the most eminent psychologists of the modern era, and we are truly honoured to have her visit. Truly, truly honoured. Now, I could give you a very, very long list of the accolades, the awards, the honorary doctorates that Dame Uta Frith has been conferred with, but we could be here for maybe 10 minutes before I get through that list, and it might not be very exciting. But just to give you a sense of who we have standing in front of us, and what I really wanted to tell you about, though, is the generosity that Uta and Chris Frith embody. Before Uta arrived for her visit this particular year, she wrote to me and said, we would just really like to meet as many people as we can, hear about their research, talk about their findings, and maybe help people along the way if we can. And I think that just tells you all you need to know about Uta and Chris and their curiosity, their generosity of spirit, and I think that's truly remarkable. I had a very, very packed schedule for them last year, and I believe that they met every single visitor with the same enthusiasm, the same excitement, and we really, really appreciate that. Without further ado, Uta, thank you so much for this wonderfully intriguingly titled talk, Alignment, Universal Mechanism for Social Creatures. We all very much look forward to hearing you talk.
Thank you, Christine. I can only say it's been an absolute pleasure to come back here. It feels like such a privilege, and I'm absolutely delighted that, you've come this morning, and I'm looking forward to our discussion because the topic I've chosen, alignment, is really, really a very edgy one, I think, and I'm not sure yet whether it justifies what I want to do, that it has its own category, that we might come to a different conclusion. Really, what I'd like to do is to share with you the news that our new book has just come out. It's so new we haven't even seen it, but we believe it's published. And what you can do, if you like, you can download it for free from the MIT Press website. You download it sort of chapter by chapter, and in fact, here are all the chapters. Here's a sort of contents page, just to give you an idea what kind of things are covered, what we consider important for our social nature. You can see there are 4 major sections, all starting with a C: cooperation, competition, computation, and culture. Now, one thing you might notice is that there is no chapter which has the title alignment. And yet, when it came to making the index, which we did with great interest because it seemed to be an opportunity to actually find out what's really in this book, we found that under alignment here, I think, yes, there are many pages where we do mention it. So it just seems strange, why do we keep talking about it but don't devote extra separate space? Is there a coherent position one can take for a category that may or may not exist, but perhaps, I optimistically say at the moment, should exist? So let's think about alignment as its own category. And why should we do that? Well, first of all, I think it is just a fact that individuals, creatures, tend to match themselves to conspecifics, and this is in order to become part of a whole. And why do they do this? Well, of course, alignment enables or facilitates incredibly important things for survival, like mating, like evasion from predators, cooperation, migration, foraging, pro-social actions. Now, can we narrow the category a bit? What do we not mean? What do I not mean at the moment by alignment? So I don't think it is exactly the same as synchrony. And the reason for this is that you can produce synchrony without having an alignment. You can have outside stimuli like a baton of a conductor. It's not the same as action copying, because you can produce copying again without alignment. You can say, please copy, and that could be done or not. It's not the same as just sort of contagion or resonance, because you can produce this by just conventions or norms. So at the moment, what I would like to propose is that alignment is an antecedent or possibly a prerequisite for synchrony, for copying, for contagion, for resonance, for affiliation, for mimicry, all of these things that seem to be at the moment sort of rather clustered together. Now, can we say something about the mechanism that we might be looking at? Of course, it is sheer guess, sheer speculation, but I think that it is probably true that what I'm talking about when I use the word alignment is this spontaneous matching or grouping, which seems to be pervasive in all living mechanisms. That's a big claim, and I think exceptions would be extremely informative. Which living organisms don't do that, don't have that? If it's true that, actually all living things have this tendency, the mechanism must be incredibly ancient. They must be so ancient, doesn't even require a brain. So based on some kind of biochemistry, based on some kind of physical mechanics, I've looked into possible things that one might think of as candidates for a mechanism, and of course one that you all know about is oxytocin, and its opposite, vasopressin, which seems to promote bonding and indeed togetherness in a group, while the hormone testosterone is now, I think, pretty much recognized for doing the opposite, actually enhancing individuality, standing away from the group, being your own person. But these are just guesses, and how on earth would this, this alignment possibility be communicated, presumably via multiple senses, and maybe possibly by olfaction in some cases, so invisible to us, not necessarily high on the agenda when we talk about human behavior. Now, I think we should look for some examples of alignment just to know what we are meeting there, and we can find alignment absolutely everywhere. That is what's so strange. And it seems to me that this ubiquity may be one of the reasons that we're not inclined to talk about alignment as a separate mechanism that's worthy to be looked at its own right. It's just everywhere. So in the world of objects, in the world of agents, and in the mental world of ideas. And let's look at some possible examples. Now here is a video which I hope will work. No, not working. I think the...
Give it a try.
Yeah, it does work. Have a look at the synchronization of metronomes. Now, these are all separate little machines, and they are completely out of with each other, right? They just sort of each have their own setting, no alignment. Now, something happens. You see these cans of Coke or whatever are put under that ledge, and they provide a common but quite unstable background, and you can probably observe how these metronomes suddenly align and how they suddenly become one machine, completely organized together, all just by themselves, no intervention. And it really seems to me just like magic. But you have to look a little bit more. This video is going on because this somewhat unstable surface is going to be removed again, and you see what happens. So are they going to stay together, do you think? Bit shaky. they're going to do their own thing again. Look at that. They're no longer one whole, just by some laws of physics. So this is very, very interesting to me. I will now show an example without a video of alignment of movements in biological agents. And as you well know, we have these wonderful images of fish forming shoals and swimming together in some amazing patterns where they keep close together and yet sufficiently apart not to collide with each other. And it's a very good strategy to frustrate predators. You'd think the predators would love to have these big shoals, but they seem to be finding it quite difficult to catch the fish. Now I'm showing you something, an example of this movement alignment in humans, in the world, in the mental world of ideas. Here it is. It's a very famous picture of a Nazi rally. And you can see that they're all united in some belief, which we now know was incredibly pernicious. And they're all holding up their arms to this salute. But not all, not all. You can see there's one in that first circle who is not raising his arm. And I think I found another one lower down, this person who seems to actually do this with his hand and not this. So I'm showing this because even so it looks like a total a picture of everybody aligning and everybody, showing this huge pressure of conformity. There are always some who don't. And I think it does take guts to resist. We assume that when we talk about alignment and this pressure to conform, there are individual differences. There are always some who don't go. And I think these non-conformists are going to be very, very important for any group because they can point the way towards counteracting, for example, groupthink or overcoming these terrible beliefs that these Nazis instilled. Now, let's go back to fish. Spatial alignment in fish, creating shoals. Now, interestingly, two rules, simple rules, are actually sufficient for this alignment. One is remain close to your neighbors, and the other is avoid collision with your neighbors. And this is also true for flocks of birds. This is a simulation which uses 3 rules. Altogether we have an avoidance of that red dot and a following somehow of some kind of center of gravity in that green dot. And you can see how these shoals are forming very easily indeed. So the 3 rules, just to be a little more detailed: steer to avoid crowding your local flockmates, steer towards the average heading of the local flockmates, steer to move toward the average position, the center of mass of local flockmates. Now that is enough for this whole simulation to happen. Now here is an example of a particular advantage that happens with forming groups. This has to do with signal averaging, because individuals might smell food, individual fish 1, fish 2, vaguely in a certain direction. If you superimpose the two, you can see that the noise can be averaged out. So the group of fish can follow a signal that's actually too weak for the individual to follow. And the alignment is what cancels out all the noise, the random movements. The shoal can move in the right direction. Now, I want to talk about alignment at 3 levels in each of 3 worlds, the worlds of objects, of agents, and ideas. We are talking at the level of making the same movement as others, which is typical for the world of objects, sharing the same goals as others, typical in the world of agents, and holding the same beliefs of others, which seems to be typical of the world of ideas and typical, I would say, of humans. Now, next, I would like to consider some examples of this alignment at these different levels. It's always about the advantages of losing a bit of your individuality to the group that you merge with, a group of conspecifics. And you know, this is obviously a cost to give up your freedom, but there are indeed benefits. Now let's look at the first example, which is, I think, a human one of pedestrians crossing a road, sharing the same goal, wanting to go to the opposite side of the road. Again, you can see that they obey these simple rules about, you know, being as close to others as possible without colliding with them, basically. Now, you know perhaps yourself from what happens when you cross the road. There is an interesting feeling of pressure to follow. You feel it most when the traffic light just doesn't seem to change, you know, stays on red, and then suddenly perhaps one person moves anyway, in this on red, a few more, and you feel, I think you really feel that pressure to also go. And you know, it's still red, and you should actually, for your safety, not take that risk. But it is a kind of, you have to go against that tendency to just follow the crowd, in this case, you know, being a bit risky. Now here's an example of aligning goals in fireflies. So they're not aligning their movements, they're not doing that particularly, they're aligning goals with an open choice of movements. So they aggregate and they send out flashes at fairly random intervals, and of course only at limited periods. So they have to be at the same place and at the same time and signal to each other in the dark. Their goal is mating. Now, another one example is of a lining ghost is in the wildebeest migration, and big herds having to find new places of pasture, and they have to often cross very big and dangerous rivers, which they do, and provide some safety for individuals. And you know, the herd has a better chance, but the individual is indeed at risk. So you can afterwards see a rather horrible field of the remains of the wildebeest that have been actually captured by all the animals, the predators that were congregating and waiting for this huge herd to pass. The crocodiles in the water, and you know, lions and other predators on the banks, ready to pounce. Still, even so, many must have lost their lives. More of the herd actually made it safely to the other side. But bear this in mind, so that alignment, in the way that I understand it, has these tremendous advantages for the group, very often, but not necessarily for the individual. Remember that. Now, this is an interesting experiment I found in humans, where I was really looking, searching literature. Do we know that humans also would like to move nearer to other humans if they can, physically, just being closer together for no reason other than being closer together? And this is a game which I think tried to get at this, and it's extraordinarily simple game, because you're given these hexagonal patterns and you're told make 10 moves with the cursor, 10 moves, and then the thing's finished, do what you like. There was no goal, there was nothing at all, but they had two goals, two conditions. One, where they were always told there are other players who are doing the same thing. In one condition they could not see the movements of the other players, and in the other condition they could. That was the only difference. Okay? And the results are very interesting, to me at least, on this graph, because on the y-axis you see the mean distance that the cursor positions kept to the other player If the player was invisible, the distance was greater. That's the black line on top. And if they were visible, the distance was significantly less. So that is sort of evidence that yes, there's no reason to do that, but they do it. They do go physically closer if they know where the other person is, because they have the means of knowing that. Now, interestingly, in this experiment, which is evidence for some kind of spontaneous flocking behavior, in human, was only seen in reduction of the distance to the neighbors. You saw no difference in latencies to making the movement or in the overall gaming time. You know, they always had these 10 goes, that was sort of fixed anyway. There's no general kind of arousal or activation or anything like that that is caused by the presence of others, because then we would have seen these effects more widespread in different measures. So a very important experiment for the idea that alignment might be separable from just forming synchrony is the experiment that was carried out by Ivana Konvalinka and Crescent and other colleagues here at the Interactive Mind Center, published in 2010. You probably know it, but I can just briefly describe it. So Ivana asked the question, how do two people manage to coordinate their action when they're tapping together? They're tapping on a keyboard, on the piano keyboard actually. So they were told, please tap in time with each other. Okay. And a metronome beat was given before each trial, and they were asked to follow this beat. And each participant had headphones on, and these headphones allowed conditions to be set where they could hear the other player and not themselves, and vice versa. So that's what is in these different boxes, and therefore you could find out answers to interesting questions. And actually what was found was that two people realign continuously via mutual adaptation. This adaptation was really on a millisecond time scale, and you could not imagine that that could be done with conscious deliberation. It was automatic, but it was not synchrony. There was continuous adaptation. That's the interesting thing. And here, of course, are the data which I can try and tell you a little bit more about, just so that you see how very interesting this experiment, this very seminal experiment is. So you ask the question, how well did the two pairs manage to tap according to the beat and in time with each other? And what you measure are the correlations at different lags from the beat in the different conditions, and that you can find the answer. So when they could only hear themselves, which is the first 3 bars, there were just no correlations. When they could only hear the other, which is the opposite side, things really were happening. There were very strong positive correlations at lag -1 and +1. And the positive correlation at lag 1 reflects the tendency of each member to adapt towards the previous inter-tap interval of the other member. So they produced a shorter interval when the other's last tap had been shorter, and they produced a longer one if the other's tap had been longer. So both members do this simultaneously, and this mutual adaptation leads to this very negative correlation at lag 0, because when one member had sped up, the other one had sped down, so you get this negative correlation. Now, another experiment which really shows something about alignment of movements when it perhaps is not a good idea. This is a kind of pressure to imitate in the rock, paper, scissors game. It is very interesting that when you see somebody making a movement, you are prompted to make the same. It's really like the pressure you feel when others cross the road. You just have to stop yourself for not just following them. And in this game of rock, paper, scissors, you can do the same thing. People spontaneously align at the level of movement, even so that is, of course, not what makes them win the game. Now, in the second experiment down below, there were only 2 responses. You either had to imitate or to do the opposite of 2 movements, these hand movements. And it was absolutely clear that when you had to make the same movement, you were very much faster than when you had to make the opposite shape. So the person who had, he was given the goal to make the same movement, was absolutely, had the advantage. I didn't go into why there was a blind player, which you can see on that graph. But just briefly, the reason was that you couldn't, one person couldn't deliberately, the one who made the movement in one condition, couldn't use any visual signals to the other person. It was purely the hand movement. Now, on the other hand, when alignment of movements is a bad idea sometimes, alignment of action goals is absolutely critical for joint action. So this is not the alignment of the movement, it's alignment of the goal. You know that when you have a cooperative action, you must often make very different movements. When you move a heavy piece of furniture up the stairs, the 2 people have to make complementary opposite movements. They should not have imitation pressure there. That just would not work. So I think this is important to bear in mind, that just as alignment is not identical to synchrony, it's not identical to just copying. Now, this, of course, this joint action is an example of the big advantage that you get by giving up a piece of your individuality to become a group member. In a group, we can achieve results we could just never achieve on our own. There is another experiment which also shows how alignment works for different movements in a task where you have to lift a bottle which has a very thin neck, so you need a pinch grip, and a thick volume where you need a power grip. So partners who are asked to lift the bottle together have to adopt different grips. So this task works incredibly well. They know immediately what to do. Having complementary action is actually the really easy thing to do, and no interference occurs, unlike in some other tasks where the imitation seems to be such a strong pressure. But remember, this is having goal alignment, not movement alignment. Now next, I'm coming to a very famous paradigm, which you probably all know, but I really think it has had a major influence on the field. A paradigm that was introduced by Nathalie Sebans and Günther Knoblich and Wolfgang Prinz, and published 2003. So just briefly, for those of you who might not so familiar with it, and just trying to convey why I think it's such an exciting paradigm. So on the screen, you see an image of a hand with a ring that can be either green or red, and your task is to press the left key when the ring is green and the right key when the ring is red. But there is a distractor. The hand sometimes points to the left and sometimes points to the right, and it's completely irrelevant to the task. But this distractor is quite powerful. And this is shown in the leftmost graph on the bottom. The reaction time, which is on the y-axis, goes up when there is interference. Now in the middle graph, you see what happens when the person is asked to do only half the task. All they have to do is press the left button while attending to the ring. They don't have to do anything with the right button. So they're much faster, you can see that. There's very little interference, if any. Now, the clever part of the experiment is that the task is also performed by 2 individuals together. each is asked to perform half the task. So one only presses the left button attending to the green ring, and the other only the right button attending to the red ring. So it should be similar to one person doing half the task on their own. But amazingly, you can see here, it's most similar to the leftmost graph when a person is doing both tasks all by themselves, when they're pressing both buttons on the left and the right. So, in other words, two people act as one. Now, this is further followed up in this idea that we align not just the task, but the action space. And this can be shown very neatly in affordances. This is what you can do in order to interact with objects, mainly shown by ability to reach an object, that an object has an affordance. And Chris in particular has studied what he called the we mode. Again, two people acting as one. And here is the example for Mr. Blue on the table, and 3 cups are within his reach, and you have the affordances for him. He can, if he wants to reach them, and 2 cups are outside, right? They're not in his ability to immediately reach. And very interestingly, you can detect changes in the motor cortex activity using magnetic pulses, using TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. And when the motor cortex is activated, it is easier to excite than a smaller magnetic pulse will elicit a movement. And using this technique, Pasquale Cardelicchio and colleagues showed that when we see a graspable object that's within our reach, our motor cortex is already excited, needs only a little extra. And this is in line with the idea of an action priority map, which indicates the location of all the graspable objects. Now, here, this experiment showed that affordances can change merely by the presence of another person and the adoption of the we mode. When Mr. Red appears and there is a we mode constructed, then the reach for Mr. Blue is suddenly enlarged. The affordance map is bigger, and you again show that with TMS, that suddenly this graspable object also needs a less extra magnetic stimulation to be active. So the we mode means that one person's goal is indeed a common goal. Alignment of the action space goes much further than affordances of objects. I think it's very interesting that it also somehow is very relevant in our ability to take on board different perspectives simultaneously. And again, this is shown in a very neat experiment, which is on the next slide. An experiment that was introduced by Dana Sampson, John Surtees, and Ian Appley, and published in 2010. An extraordinarily nice experiment for me. You see pictures on the screen, just as here on the slide, and your task is simply to say how many dots you see. Now, distraction is introduced by positioning an avatar in the picture, and sometimes the avatar sees the same number of dots as you, and sometimes a different number. When you get the instruction to do the tasks, say how many dots there are, the avatar is never mentioned. What the avatar sees is irrelevant to your task. Nevertheless, people cannot help but being slowed down when there's a discrepancy in the number of dots that the avatar can see. It takes longer to say how many dots you see if this is different from what the avatar sees. The black histogram, the black column, shows you that it is slower. As an automatic effect, it is actually a disadvantage. Now on the right part of the graph below, you see what happens when there isn't an avatar, but instead just a single rectangle. It's also distracting to have a rectangle, but it's not distracting in terms of taking on another person's perspective. So, let's now look at alignment in the world of ideas and beliefs. And this is where we very much move into the world of humans. What do we know about ideas and beliefs in other animals? We don't know. They lack language. We can't communicate with them. They can't communicate with us. For the moment, we're just, looking at humans. And one of the ideas and beliefs is, of course, also just things like style and fashion. It's not always a religious faith or political party. There's very spontaneous adoption of styles and tastes, and it is such an interesting phenomenon that the followers of a fashion are often quite unaware that they are following it. And so we can say again that this is not a rare occurrence. This is an unconscious alignment at the mental level. It happens all the time. And one of the times which has actually been studied and is very, very revealing and interesting is when we are talking to each other. Now, how do dialogues work? How is it possible that we share what we mean about words we see, pictures we might have to match up to the words? Now, I know at Aarhus a lot of work is being done exactly about this sort of topic, but I'm just giving here an example from Martin Pickering, Simon Garrett, who've got a large body of work and try to understand how two speakers align with each other about meanings, and they do use the word align. So in this one experiment, which I refer to here, they used ambiguous shapes, and they had to be described by one speaker, the director, and then understood by the second speaker, who had to match the description with a picture, choosing it from a lot of other pictures. So for example, here, getting this shape, the director starts by describing the figure using long, detailed sentences. He says, that's an actual example. The next one looks like a person who's ice skating, except they're sticking two arms out in front. In subsequent turns, his descriptions become simpler and simpler. So the next thing might be, this one is the person ice skating with two arms. And until both director and matcher align on the representation, ice skater. So within very few exchanges, they come to an agreement how to refer to such an ambiguous figure by a simple name. And there is indeed a model for this, which shows that there is physical alignment in our way of talking together using a phonological level, and there is also mental alignment going higher and higher, not only at the semantic level, but also at the whole context, the whole situational level. So alignment is incredibly complex, incredibly automatic, incredibly unconscious. Now, people do tend to use the same vocabulary when they talk together. They adjust to it. They use the same syntax. And very importantly, they do not reach alignment in isolation. There has to be interaction. Otherwise, they just stay with their chosen expressions and phonology. Now, here is another experiment that I like very much and reveals something very interesting at a very high level of alignment. Here it is. This is about using actually an EEG measurement, and as you know, the N400 is a particularly interesting phenomenon that indicates surprise, or rather a mismatch. Now, you have the sentence, the girl had a little beak. That's weird. You get this N400 response. But in this experiment, they had a condition where they made this weird sentence perfect. perfectly reasonable. So you were given now the sentence, the girl went to the party dressed up as a canary. And then the sentence, the girl had a little beak. And you think, that's fine, no surprise, no N400. It just disappears, okay? But what's so interesting in this experiment is that they had two participants. One heard the previous disambiguating sentence, and the other one didn't. So when the participant actually read the sentence, the girl has a little beak in the presence of a person who had not been aware that there was this first sentence. Then the mismatch effect came back in that person, the social N400. I hope I make that clear. So when they were on their own, no surprise. When they were with the person where they expected that person to have a surprise, they showed the surprise themselves. So again, an amazing a piece of evidence about what alignment might be about. Now, a very big topic is the alignment of confidence. And again, here, this is work that very much belongs to the Interacting Mind Center, with really seminal experiments on making joint decisions for very hard perceptual judgments, because they're very suitable to really model what's going on. And what was found is joint decision is better than the best individual decision, and this advantage arises if in each trial the judgment of the more confident person is chosen. And it became clear that people in this experiment, the special feature of the experiment was that if the participants disagreed in that perceptual judgment, they could discuss which of their responses they should actually choose to transmit as their final word. And the discussion was the most interesting part, and it was quite clear what they were actually doing in this discussion. They talked about their confidence, whether they saw it properly, whether they hardly saw it, whether their attention shifted, and so on. Now, I don't want to say more because I hope you are all familiar with this wonderful work, and of course carried out by Christian Tulin, Riccardo Fusaroli, and other colleagues, and of course also Bahadur Barami and Dan Bang further. So it's a really substantial body of work, but I would just mention something that you should immediately say, think and feel. Surely there are big differences in how people express their confidence. Yes, there are big differences. You can see here from the work of Dan how two people, person A, person B, might have extraordinarily divergent estimates of their confidence. One is overconfident and one is underconfident. Of course, what they have to do is somehow try to match their confidence, otherwise they could never understand each other. Now the question is this matching actually happening? And again, another experiment by Dan Bang and colleagues showed that yes, it is happening. So the top graph shows you when two people working each in isolation, they do indeed express different level of confidence. There's no correlation between them. But when the same two people work together, they do align their confidence and you get this correlation. So this is really extraordinary to see that we don't need to despair and say everybody's so different about their level of confidence, they can't possibly ever come together. But yes, they can, which is amazing. But up to a point, I do want to say that, because there is an aligning of confidence possible when it is not a good idea. It is very often the case that a competent person works together with a not very competent person, and that one happens to be the really confident one. And an ignorant person can express very forcefully confidence, and sometimes the expert is the one who is sort of much more hesitant. and knows that there is much more to know, and they shouldn't be too confident, to express too much confidence. So if these two people are together, that is a problem. That means too much weight is given to the incompetent person, so that's not a very good thing, but it can happen. And we have to be aware of it. So we're coming now to the idea where alignment can give disadvantages, where we don't want it to happen. And in actually a whole area of social interaction that's called competition is one where we don't really see the advantages of alignment at all. When you are in a competition, you don't want to merge with your competitor. You want to keep your own individuality. You want to outperform your competitor. You want to outwit the competitor. You have to keep yourself separate to get an advantage. And of course, we do not trust the competitor, as we assume that they will want to get an advantage at our cost. So it's very much, we understand that this is quite mutual, and we will have to invest a lot in avoiding this automatic alignment, like resisting crossing the road when it's dangerous. And the most dangerous situation is when the competitor uses deception. How easy is it to tell when people use deception? Can we guard against it? Now, very interestingly, there is an experiment on this, and it leads to the conclusion that deception is actually a very advanced skill, and it's very difficult to detect it. So in one large study, the average accuracy level was 54%, when 50% was chance. That's how difficult it is. And one of the problems, perhaps, is our tendency to align, our tendency to mimic. And there is an experiment that might confirm this suspicion. So here, people that are instructed to mimic and judge the truthfulness of what another person says. Now, when they mimic, they trust the lying person much more than when they not mimicking. You can see there's an actual mirror image. So mimicking being a product of alignment shows you that actually may be the real hurdle in tracking another person that will deceive you. Indeed, mimicking has been shown to increase liking for each other, so avoiding competition. And to detect deception, we have to overcome this drive to be friendly and to be liked. And this involves top-down control. So now we come to what I would call managed alignment. So this is not just that we automatically do something, or that we automatically do not stop ourselves from doing things, but actually trying to get the best of both worlds. So we sort of realize that alignment is often so automatic and pressing that it's blind to long-term consequences, and we want to do something about it. And I think as humans we have a form of managed alignment that implies the awareness of the longer-term consequences, and I think it's really hugely important aspect of our cultural life, and I think we can trace it at the three levels I mentioned already: the physical, biological, and mental world. So let's look at some examples. We have the examples of managed alignment at the physical level in this wonderful art form, dance, or in this case, ballet. So all these dance forms are dependent on years of learning by the dancers, really managing, led by a choreographer, led by artists, more managing, led and enabled by a whole infrastructure of cultural institutions that provides the stage, provides the audience, and all these things. So this is just aligning movements at a level which goes way beyond the automatic and spontaneous, but uses the automatic and spontaneous to great effect. The next level is shared goals, and that is something where you immediately think of an army. Alignment of an army is a work, again, that demands complex cultural infrastructure, including strategists and including, craftsmen who fashion the armor. And the legionnaires, of course, here the Romans, have a common goal to advance on the enemy and to avoid getting overrun, and flexibly regroup if one of them is injured or killed. So how glaringly obvious in this example that individuals will of course be sacrificed for the good of the group, and really a glaring example for disadvantage for individuals to merge with the group. Now the next level is about shared beliefs, the mental world. You can think about at the very high level religions and faith, but there of course at another level clubs and societies and parties, entities that are governed by common beliefs. And what's common in all these examples that I've given now is that there is a leader who organizes a group and followers who are joined together following the leader's guidance and obeys authority. I think the army wouldn't work unless it had that. The ballet would collapse if there wasn't this mastermind behind it and saying what exactly should be done. Now, as an aside, I recently read a paper by Mascaro. He concluded that social organization in more than 100 species has been found to be pyramidal, that is, with the leader on top and many underlings underneath. And humans fall in the same pattern. And they argued in this paper that we are primed from infancy to perceive interactions in this hierarchical fashion. And this hierarchical system needs alignment, otherwise it wouldn't work, with particular rules. For example, the rule, obey authority. Just as an aside. Now, I have to show, of course, the example of the conductor as an example of this managed alignment, and also demonstrating that it is really easy that we can follow an external signal. The orchestra players follow the conductor very deliberately, and they also follow each other. It's a sort of combination of automatic and controlled alignment. These two kinds of alignment are in alignment. And it's not a question of either or, but conscious and unconscious system communicating with each other. And now I also want to show you that human leader is not always present. We can outsource that job and just use a number of completely mechanical external stimuli work very well. The example here I'm giving you is the traffic light. It regulates our physical alignment. It really does a fantastic job avoiding crashing into each other, doing the right thing. We don't have to think about it at all. And we don't have to have a person there to tell us. Of course, we don't need a concrete stimulus like a traffic light, but instead we can have rules or norms or conventions, and sometimes these are not even written down or made explicit. So externally provided norms allow us to manage the advantages and disadvantages of our spontaneous tendency to align, and they work even without external signs, regulators such as traffic lights. So, for example, in the London Tube, we've learned to move on the left, stand on the right, and people in a hurry can then pass on the left. That's quite an unwritten rule, and a typical convention that's set up in that culture. And the question, of course, is now, how on earth do we come under the influence of culture? A very big question. And it becomes, of course, possible when we are able to process in the information in the world of ideas at the very highest level of our information processing system. And for this, we need metacognitive monitoring. In other words, we have to understand not just the conventions, but the point of the conventions. Now, we don't need external stimuli. I've emphasized this. Norms imposed from the outside can be internalized. So they become habits. Children learn often very, very slowly, as parents know, to brush their teeth and wash their hands. But once they're habits, you hardly need any conscious effort to put them into action. You just have the action triggered automatically by the right stimuli, so we feel uncomfortable if we haven't been able to brush our teeth on getting up, for example. Now, I think that it's important to say that in everyday life, our joint action needs both the spontaneous and the deliberate alignment. So spontaneous alignment is often reinforced by an explicit commitment to each other. So we have training courses to create bonds between partners. They may be asked to project corporate identity to the outside, to wear the same uniform, to use similar language, have the same goal inside, and so on. Now, again, I want to say conscious alignment merges with automatic alignment, coexists together, and at the level of the mental world, we can invoke common traditions, common ideals, in order to rally a group, for example, here to celebrate, but of course also on the contrary, to mourn or to exhort people to make sacrifices. Now I'm coming to sort of summing up at the end. What are the hypotheses that I was trying to present? I hope I convinced you that the notion of alignment plays actually a very big role in social interaction and communication. I hope I gave examples enough to say that it can be observed at different levels, one governed by the law of physics, one governed by the goals of agents, and one governed by their mental world, their beliefs. Now, my hypothesis, that's also the title of the talk, is that automatic alignment is a universal mechanism present wherever we look. But, the limits would be so interesting to investigate. I presume this to be an innate prior, triggered, fine-tuned by the presence of conspecifics. And I think we have no idea what the mechanism is, but it seems to have a basis in some very, unknown biochemistry. The second hypothesis is that there is also a form of conscious alignment, at least in humans. And it's important to be realized that we do use external aids to smooth out social interactions. We use rules, conventions, norms. We rely on habit learning to internalize the norms so that we don't have to stop and think at every action in this complex mental world. And as I've already mentioned, this is dependent on some level of metacognitive monitoring, and this is what enables us to inhibit alignment or even instigate it. And surely it is reinforced through cultural norms and subject to learning. So much of normative behavior can be understood as following rules for alignment of beliefs. Now, what are the major questions that remain? And I'm sorry to say that I still am not sure whether alignment can be cleanly separated from its effects. Effects such as synchrony, resonance, contagion, mutation, affiliation, conformity, all of these things which I've given in the examples. It may be the case that alignment is not necessarily a separate category, even so that was my whole aim when I sort of prepared this talk. I'm not sure. Other question is whether automatic alignment is the gateway to forming social groups, and it's all about the good of the group and not the good of the individual. Is that too sharp a distinction? I'm not sure. Then another question is whether conscious alignment is unique to humans, and is it the case that it helps us balance this possible conflict between what is good for the group and good for the individual? And then, of course, we do have that other interesting question lurking about individual variation in tendency to conform. Is that individual variation another hugely important player in the solution to these problems of balancing out the advantages and disadvantages? So these are just some of the questions that I certainly am left with, but many, many more questions no doubt will arise, and I hope some will come from you now. Thank you.